Welcome to A Peaceful Path, special education legal advocacy for families with children that have special needs.
Hello and welcome back to A Peaceful Path, special education legal advocacy for families with children that have special needs. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today, as always, I'm joined by special education attorney Michelle Becker. Michelle is a special education attorney and passionate advocate for families navigating the public school system. In this episode, we're talking about something that can make or break your child's educational support plan: assessments. Michelle, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So can you just start by explaining why assessments are such a critical part of the special education process?
Yes, absolutely. This piece of the puzzle really does make or break your kid's trajectory, because this is the data that's gathered. It's not anecdotal, it's standardized data that helps school districts and families really understand how your child is or is not being impacted in some way that's affecting access to education. And in fact, the assessments that are provided identify whether or not your kid actually qualifies for one of 13 different qualifying disabilities for special education. There's only 13 ways. And in some districts, there may be 14, but generally speaking, there's 13 ways. And all of the assessment data is how a school district determines whether or not a kid is eligible for special education. And it goes a little further to say, you may qualify you may have an eligibility. However, if that eligibility doesn't impact your kid's access to education, then you still don't qualify, even if assessments have determined that your kid has a disability. So for example, there are assessments. Every school district assessment includes cognition, visual processing, auditory processing, phonological processing, visual motor skills, and social emotional. On a very basic level, they find out, how your kid's brain is working from a cognition standpoint. One of the scores is IQ, but basically, how's your kid's brain working? And then the visual, how is your kid's vision working? Auditory, how is your kid, perceiving auditory input? Phonological, that's the piece about reading, right? Is the phonological processing intact? But there's also other assessments within this battery of assessments. One could be for emotional disturbance. One could be for autism. One could be for ADHD. And if you have a kid with autism, you might include the autism assessment in this battery of standardized tests. So you'd go through and you'd say, okay, so let's just say we have a kid who's really functioning well, Elon Musk cognition, but the autism score is way off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so great, your kid, or not great, but okay, so your kid has autism. Does autism, in this case, impact your kid's access? So then you look at the auditory, you look at the speech and language, you look at the social emotional, and you look at all of these assessments and you say, okay, the kid does have autism and the kid is impacted by speech and language and social emotional. Okay, so what are the kid's grades? Now you look at the anecdotal. Does the kid have friends? Does the kid have good grades? How is the kid's executive functioning? And all of this data is either in the reports or in school district anecdotal data from the kid's performance. And you need all of that to determine how to help your kid.
I know we've talked about this before, but just for a refresher for anybody who didn't catch earlier episodes, if a parent thinks that a child needs to be assessed or evaluated, what's the first step in getting that assessment in motion?
So the first thing you do once you notice that your kid, maybe you come to school and you say, look, my kid was just diagnosed with autism, or my kid was just diagnosed with ADHD, and I think that he needs an assessment. you write, you have to put it in writing. I please, assess my kid or provide my kid with what I tell my clients is, I'm requesting a comprehensive psychoeducational evaluation. My kid was just diagnosed with autism or ADHD, um, or my kid has anxiety and it's impacting his or her education in ways that is causing low grades or whatever. It doesn't have
Mhm.
to be some lawyerly written letter. It just has to be, please assess, this is why, and this is what I think is going on, and this is what I see happening. I will look forward to your response, or I look forward to an assessment plan within the next 15 days, because 15 days is the requirement by the state. And once you get that, the school district will then, if they agree, they'll send you an assessment plan. And that's like the document that says, yes, we will assess your kid.
Okay.
And in that assessment plan, they'll say, okay, we're going to do the cognition, we're going to do the auditory processing, the speech, the whatever list of assessments. You have to look at it, because if it's ADHD, please make sure you test for ADHD. If it's autism, please make sure you test for autism too. And then you sign it. And that again triggers in California, by you signing and submitting it. Let's say you submitted it that same day. I agree. Please assess my kid, and you date it. Well, the district has 60 days, not not business days, but calendar days. 60 calendar days to not only assess your kid, but also hold the IEP.
Okay.
Yeah. And that those are just hard coded numbers, the hard coded timelines. It's in the law. That's so technically, between the time you ask for an assessment and get an IEP, could be as big as 75 days, but could be shorter.
Okay.
Yet people are strung along for 1, 2, 3 years.
Yeah. Even
And
75 seems like a lot.
yeah, 75 seems like but if the district is actually doing assessments and let's say you ask in September and then they start in October, November, you literally could have an IEP before the end of December. And
Mhm.
even though that seems like a lot, there's still like families that wait years. They keep getting strung along. So request for assessment is the only entry point.
Do you find at all that sometimes these evaluations might be rushed or incomplete? And if so, what are some of those signs?
Yeah. So the first thing that so I I what I would say is, I think that the actual assessments are not difficult to administer, right? They're administered all day long, every single day to kids. The real struggle is in the analysis of the assessment data, right? Putting all the pieces together. So as soon as I get an assessment from a parent, and I go through it with them, and I help them understand what all the data says, because they could be a 30, 40 page report with a lot of numbers and a lot of words. And it could be very overwhelming for a parent who's struggling just to get one page of homework done to
Yeah.
read something like that. So the first thing I do is say, does this sound like your kid? And then I give some examples based on what the data says. Yeah, that sounds like my kid. Okay.
Mhm.
So if this sounds like your kid, then the assessment's probably right. It's not the assessment being right that matters, though. We really need to interpret what the assessment says and what we need to do, what we need to put in place to help your kid access their education. So it's one thing to get an assessment, it's another thing to get an assessment with good data. It's another thing to get a good assessment with good data that results in a good IEP.
Mhm.
So I think that that's really where all of the real issues come in, because you have a bunch of levers basically, right? Do we try this? Do we try this? Do we try this? How much of this do we need? How much of that do we need? And that's where the real collaboration and understanding of the data comes in.
Mhm.
So, one of the things we have talked about, maybe it was in this podcast or maybe a different session, where we talked about a kid who only knew 17 out of 26 letters,
Mhm.
or a kid who doesn't know how to syllabicate. So that stuff comes out in one of the assessments, in the battery of assessments. Okay, so now what do you do with that information? Okay, so now I know my kid only knows 17 letters. Do they consistently know these 17? Do they guess? Do they know the other ones? Is there a discrepancy between consonants and vowels? Is there a visual thing with W's and V's? Like, what exactly is going on with this kid and what they're missing? It's one thing to say my kid only knows 17 letters. That already puts him out of fifth grade. But what is he missing? Is it the sounds? When you
Yeah.
think about every letter, right? You've got how many sounds for A? How many sounds for E? And what happens when there's an E at the end of a letter, at the end of a word?
Absolutely. English is one of the hardest languages to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the data will tell you he only knows 17 letters, but what is the impact of of that information? What is
Mhm.
really impeding his ability to read?
Mhm.
So what this comes down to is not just getting good data. It's knowing what to do with it once you've got it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point too, because if you have just saying, "Oh, he only knows 17 letters," well, okay, what does he know about those letters too, or she? Like, what do they know about how did the letters go together, or how they don't, or how they, are, what do they know about them, or can they just identify them and that's it?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? Blending,
Yeah.
separate, rhyming. There's so much that just comes with very early level reading.
Right.
And then, not to confuse this even more, but I think a bigger issue is something that's basically called orthographic processing, which is, I use the example of read, READ. Okay, so let's just say that you're a first grader and you're learning to sound out words. Okay, if you were going to sound out the word read, you're going to go Riyadh, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And then you learn over time that EA sounds like E,
Mhm.
right? Or GH sounds like or something else,
Yeah.
right? So there is, at some point, and it usually happens around second or third grade. Reading specialists can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically there comes a point in time where efficiencies are built into how we read and we learn, right?
Mhm.
We learn early on EA sounds like E, and EE sounds like E, and PH sounds like, and GH sounds like. You stop decoding and you result to some automatic knowledge that's just built into your brain. Okay,
Mhm.
so you could have a kid who only knows 17 letters, and then you have the kid that hasn't built those automatic skills. So now you have a fifth grader that hasn't done either of those things. What are you going to do? And that's really where all this comes into play. Okay, so this kid is struggling with letter identification. We need a remedial reading program. Okay, but what else does the data tell us about this kid? The orthographic processing's not there. He doesn't know his vowels, let's say. So he's an early, maybe first grade kindergarten reader. Well, let's get him into a reading program. Let's have a very specific reading program for him to teach him how to read phonetically, right? So then, okay, so what programs do you have? And that's where it comes into ultimately building an IEP that supports the needs that have been identified, not only based on the assessment data, but the anecdotal data that you guys have talked about around the IEP table. Right? It's not as simple as, okay, well, we'll teach them the other, 8 letters.
Yeah. Just get him caught up. It's fine. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, no, it's not that simple.
Well, and just to layer on top of that, let's going with this reading example, you might find that the assessment data in phonological processing shows that he has a phonological processing disorder. Okay, if he's got a phonological processing disorder, it could be dyslexia. And there's a whole matrix and a model from which you determine that. But phonological processing disorder, doesn't know all of his letters, potentially dyslexia. We need a dyslexia California guidelines curriculum to support this kid. All of a sudden, you have unlocked one major issue just by getting this assessment data and analyzing it in a way that actually makes sense for that particular kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is an independent educational evaluation?
Okay, so an independent educational evaluation, shortcut IEE, is where you actually request the district fund an outside evaluation because you disagree with what the district has said.
Okay.
Okay. And basically, the way that works is, so if you recall, one of the first things that I do when I meet with the parent is say, does this assessment sound like your kid? And if the first thing is no, this doesn't even sound like my kid, well, that might be the very first sign that you need an independent education evaluation. So what doesn't? Well, my kid's reading a lot better or a lot worse than this, and my kid can't remember anything, or it could be maybe 1 or 15 things in this assessment that we kind of tease out that says this doesn't sound like my kid. So then you go back to the district and say, again, informally first, this doesn't sound like this kid. Can we talk about this? And if they're like, no, this is it, we pulled the data, the family has the right to disagree. And that right triggers ability to request an independent educational evaluation. But it is a double-edged sword. The district has only 2 options when you request an IEE. And the short-term way to remember this is they can fund it or they can file due process against you. Those are the only 2 ways that you can resolve this disagreement in the assessment. So it's not to be taken lightly. It's not like you just say, no, I disagree. I want a new assessment by this expert assessor. It actually triggers the district to have to sue you if they still stand behind their assessment. So
Wow.
you're asking for litigation if you make this request. Now, that's not to say that you don't need it, right? Because the district has to file against you, and the district then has to prove to the judge why they denied you.
Right.
So you're kind of on the other side of the table in this type of due process litigation. But ultimately, the key I have found, and maybe this is where you would need a lawyer or you would need somebody to counsel you on how to write this request. You don't have to even give a reason why you want to get an IEE, but I think your chances are a lot higher of being denied if you don't give a well-articulated reason why, because then it triggers them suing you. So if I know that in my requests for IEEs that I do make, it's very well documented why. And so the district has never disagreed. Now, and actually, one time a district did disagree. They changed their mind the night before the due process hearing.
Interesting.
Yes.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not gonna say it's some, strategy, but if you're right and you fight, you will win.
Yeah.
You have to have the data though. And again, all things being fair and just, you will win. Even if it is the night before.
Even if it's the night before. That's
Yes.
funny. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So basically, even in that case, we ended up getting it and we were right about the data.
Right. Yeah. The data
So
doesn't lie. Yeah.
yeah, so you do have to fight when you know you're right. I prefer to massage it as long as I can, but when it's clear that the district is not going to budge, then you do have to fight.
Yeah.
And if you're right and the data is behind you and all of the evidence is behind you, this is not a situation. None of these situations are that complicated, but for some reason, sometimes districts just dig in their heels
Yeah.
and you have to fight. And in the end, it's not emotional, it's very much practical, and the data is there to support you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on A Peaceful Path. If you need help requesting an evaluation or reviewing your child's existing assessment,
Yes.
Michelle is here to guide you. Visit michellebeckerlaw.com to learn more. And if you found this useful, please subscribe to our show, leave us a review, share this episode with someone who might need it. Michelle, I always love chatting with you. Such great information. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.